This is the Initiates Podcast. Here, we create space to explore the path of initiation as we reawaken the forgotten wisdom that resides within us all. I am your host and guide, Natalie Grace. Join me every Thursday for an enlightening exploration of contemporary spirituality. It's my honour to journey with you. Hello, beautiful friends. Thank you for joining me. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about something deep, something dark, something shadowy. Yeah, we're going to be talking about shadow work. So shadow work is something that is spoken about a lot in the spiritual scene, but even in the mainstream nowadays. And I often get asked the question, what is shadow work and how do I do it? It's almost as if people feeling into the collective energy on an individual basis, starting to feel some kind of compulsion to partake in shadow work and work with their own shadows, but don't know how to do it, don't know where to start, don't really even understand the why, let alone the how. So this is something that I want to talk about today, and I am sure I'm going to be touching on this in future episodes. So consider this as a real basic shadow work part 1, because it's a really deep subject to dive into. But I feel it's super important to do this in the context of the recent episodes of transformation, that transformational journey, starting out with the fear of the need for change and then moving through the dark night of the soul and the devotion to self that comes with pulling yourself out of the dark night of the soul into a more positive vibrational state. That through that process, shadow work is extremely important, and it's something that can sneak up on us a bit. We can be confronted with the need to do shadow work and not understand what it is in these transitional times, or we can be at a point in our lives when we're just sick of dealing with the same repeating patterns and really understand that it's time now to make some change, and that change starts within. Change also starts with intention and awareness. So that's what I want to help you with today. I feel like through my own journey, I've got a really good experience and understanding of working with my shadow, and I'm hoping that I can frame that in a way that's really easy to digest and understand for you to help you with your own shadow work going forward. So let's journey. Okay, shadow work. Let's just start with what is shadow work? What is it? You know me, I like to investigate the words, so I thought I'd go in and just start with basic definitions to get the ball rolling. The definition of shadow is the darkness or diminished light caused by the blocking of a light source. And work, physical or mental effort or activity directed toward the production or accomplishment of something. So if we're wanting to really understand what shadow work is, it is the act of working with the areas of yourself, the aspects of yourself that you keep hidden from the light. As the definitions point to, it does take effort, and it takes direction, and it takes intention, and that there is also a goal here that we're wanting to accomplish. And that goal is the integration of the shadow. What does that mean? It actually means making yourself whole. That's the goal here. We are wanting to realize ourselves in our wholeness, in our fullness, and love ourselves, accept ourselves in our wholeness and our fullness. So it's really a unifying of all aspects of self. That's the goal with shadow work. So shadow work can also be referred to as self-reflection, self-examination, simply self-work. Even personal development should involve shadow work. Shadow work requires us to illuminate and enlighten those hidden areas of self, whether that's areas that we keep hidden intentionally or areas that we subconsciously hide as an act of protection or avoidance. Shadow work requires us to actively identify and then remove the blockages that keep the light source from reaching us in our wholeness. So going back to that definition of shadow, acknowledging that we all have blockages that stop the light from getting to us in certain aspects that are hidden, and that it's a process of working on those blockages in order to illuminate those aspects of self, to enlighten those aspects of self. Shadow work is an ongoing practice of awareness with the ultimate goal of the integration of shadow. So I mentioned at the very beginning that that's how I see shadow work. It's an awareness practice, and it's a constant awareness practice. So when you start with the shadow work, it can be really deep and dark, and it can be really difficult and painful and challenging, and you're going to be hitting walls of resistance. But once you've gotten past that part, you'll get to those points again at the right times in your own journey of development and enlightenment. But beyond that, if you really are doing your shadow work, you have an ongoing practice of awareness of emotional reactions, awareness of thought processes, awareness of programs that exist within you in your subconscious that you're working with to reshape and reform. And the ultimate goal here is integration of the shadow. And for me, that's acceptance. So full acceptance of the shadow parts of ourselves. And sometimes these are really, really dark parts, especially when, say, we're dealing with shadow caused by trauma and neglect, for instance. This requires radical self-acceptance. And this isn't about forgiveness or anything like that, although that can be part of the journey. This is acceptance of those parts of yourself as being part of you that you no longer want to avoid or keep hidden. Shadow work is understanding our triggers and the emotional responses those triggers elicit within us and how they impact ourselves and other people, also our future trajectories and our past experiences. Shadow work is reprogramming of our subconscious behaviors. So these can be limiting programs, limiting self-beliefs. This can be patterns of behavior driven by our subconscious that lead us into behaviors of self-harm, for instance, or addiction or self-sabotage. This can also just describe the subconscious responses we have when we get triggered by something. Triggers are ultimately challenging our shadow aspects. Shadow work is about going to the source of our pain, of our hurt, of our turmoil, of our guilt, of our shame, of our anger, our fear. Again, I'll elaborate on that soon. But those emotions that we feel within us that don't necessarily have an immediate kind of cause that we can pinpoint in the present moment, those deep emotions are really great indicators of shadow aspects of self. And when we can face the discomfort of experiencing and exploring those feelings, those subconscious feelings, we can get to the source of where they stem from and why we feel them. And then we get to do the work. Shadow work is the active intention of deep unconditional love for self. It's only at that point when we're wanting to show ourselves that deep, deep love that we're ready to embark on a journey of shadow work. And ultimately, like I said earlier, it's all about becoming whole It's realizing yourself and your fullness and your wholeness, unifying all aspects of yourself, the light and the dark. So what is the shadow? So the term shadow self was pioneered by Carl Jung, and he was really interested in the subconscious self. So the shadow self is ultimately the parts of yourself that you avoid, you keep hidden, or you reject. We all have a shadow. So having a shadow is completely normal and completely human. And our shadows have different aspects. They're all unique to each and every one of us. So our shadows can't be avoided. They can't be deleted. In fact, having a shadow is the nature of being human, or any object really in our 3D reality, where we're governed by the law of duality. First of all, that where there is light, there must be dark. So it is a beautiful natural balance that we each carry within us, that existence of light and dark and every shade in between. And then if we think about how shadows work, so each and every one of you would cast a shadow if you stand in the sun. There's nothing you can do to remove that shadow. You can go and stand in the shade, but then you're just enveloped by another shadow, right? So the shadows don't go away. As long as we have this light source, there will be the experience of the dark contrast. So when we have the sun, the shade is the contrast of that sunlight. And so then the darkness is the absence of light. But even in the darkest sky, there's the moon. The moon is a beautiful illuminator. Even when the moon is new and it's completely dark in the sky, the stars shine even brighter. So there's always some form of illumination in our world, even when the sun is gone. And this can give us some really beautiful inspiration and hope when we're in a dark place and we're embarking on this journey of shadow work. The light is attainable. You are able to find that balance, because no matter how dark it gets in our world, there is always a source of light. And even in the darkest cave, which is part of the initiatory journey of, say, a monk, even in the darkest cave, what you are seeking is the light within that keeps you warm, that keeps you nurtured, that keeps you bright. So trying to break your shadow or delete your shadow is futile. What we're really aiming to do here is to integrate the shadow parts of self. So what does integrate mean? To integrate the shadow, we want to gain an awareness, first of all, of our shadow aspects. A lot of the time we suppress, we bury the parts of ourself that we feel, say, ashamed of. We also avoid the parts of ourselves that we are fearful of. So it's really an exploration of shadow aspects so that we can have an awareness of what our shadows are. So that's the first step in integrating. We also want to understand how our shadows reveal themselves through our emotions, our thoughts, our behaviors, and what triggers these responses in us. So that is not just an awareness of our shadows, but also an awareness of our triggers and what this does to our shadows. Often we find out about our shadows through observing our triggers. We wonder why we react in a certain negative way when something particular happens, or someone says something that really gets on our nerves or grates on us or upsets us or hurts us. If we pause in those moments and have some self-reflection, we wonder, why do I react that way? Other people don't react that way when that kind of thing happens. And so observing those triggers is a really great way to identify what your shadow aspects are. And so once we've got that awareness of our triggers and our shadow aspects, and then we've also gaining a new understanding of how those triggers, what sort of reactions, emotional and mental and even physical, those triggers elicit within us, then we can go on a journey of investigation. investigating our shadow. A lot of this has to do with going to the source. Where does this shadow come from? Where did it start? Why do I carry this? Why is this my shadow? So often it goes back to childhood. A lot of those subconscious, lower frequency emotions that we carry that reveal themselves when we get triggered stem from experiences in our childhood, often to do with our parents. And that can be actions our parents have taken, or even just behaviors our parents had, their own subconscious behaviors, their own shadows that we observed and witnessed and lived with and absorbed a lot of the time. And this we often describe as programs. So this can be programs, some really popular ones I'll name, programs of lack, programs of limited belief in oneself, programs around our self-worth. These are all things that we have internalized in our subconscious based on experiences our younger selves had. So at that point, we're looking at what we've internalized within our subconscious. And once we've done that investigation, and it can be very thorough, it can be very emotionally intensive, but it's also so enlightening to go through that process. Once we've gone through that, we can get to the stage where we're ready to integrate some of what we've learned. So for me, this really means finding acceptance for these parts of ourselves that we hold shame around, or fear, or guilt, or anger. Acceptance really, for me, describes the decision that we make at this point to no longer avoid that part of oneself, to no longer run away from, or perhaps it can be around fighting. I'm going to accept this aspect of myself instead of fighting it because I desperately don't want to experience it. What if we found acceptance for those parts of ourselves and gave ourselves love? Wouldn't that be beautiful? And what this does is when we go through this integration process and we start seeing those triggers pop up, we have new ways of dealing with the reactions they would have previously elicited. We have an awareness of what that might do to us, and we've done work, internal work, inner work, to be able to deal with that in a more positive way. Integration also allows us to reprogram ourselves. So changing those subconscious programs that we have adopted or absorbed or created for ourselves out of necessity, out of survival, reprogramming those so that we can change our behaviors, we can manage our emotions better, we can reframe our self-talk from negative to more positive, more empowering, and also ultimately create new stories. So there's lots of techniques that we can use to help us reprogram our subconscious. So it's really important to reiterate here that we're not deleting parts of ourselves. We are attempting to accept and love ourselves in our wholeness and in our fullness. I also want to say that it's not at all about killing or dissolving the ego. I feel like this is quite an old-fashioned thing to talk about now, killing of the ego. I think we've all evolved beyond that a bit, but just in case that concept's not familiar to you. But the ego, it plays a really important job in our lives and in our development especially. It's the part of ourselves that is there to protect us at all costs because it wants us to survive. And a lot of that is to do with keeping us comfortable and safe, which, as I've talked about before, if you sit in that energy for too long, you really limit your own potential. You exclude possibility for growth and evolution and development. And so on the one hand, ego is great at protecting us, but on the other hand, we have to learn how to work with our egos in order for us to evolve. And spiritually, I want to say it's a really important part, I believe, of any kind of spiritual awakening journey to gain an understanding of the ego and its job and its role in your life, and finding acceptance for the ego, thanking the ego for the good job it's done in protecting you, but knowing when to also take the reins of authority back from the ego and push yourself through uncomfortable emotions in order to find those breakthrough moments. And if you can hear some funny squawking in the background, they're my chickens. There's not much I can do about that noise, so I'm just going to push through regardless of my own negative emotions about that. So I want to share something super interesting I read when I was researching this episode, and I was looking up those definitions. There was a little snippet from Wikipedia with the definition of shadow work. However, this definition of shadow work was the economic definition. And if you've listened to previous episodes, you might know how much I love looking at economic terminology and going beyond the economic meanings of those phrases. But let me read this to you because I just think it's super interesting. In economics, shadow work refers to a special kind of unpaid labor. It includes assembling of goods that come in pieces, self-checkout at supermarkets, and self-service at gas stations. Jobs that are necessary for completing a purchase that have been left to the consumers as a way of rationalizing production. Now, how interesting is that? That society has left us in parts as a way of rationalizing our existence. And whether that's fair or not, I think is irrelevant. It's just our reality, and part of that acceptance is accepting that that's our reality, that just like the economic shadow work, we emerge into our adult selves, into the big wide world with some broken parts or with some unfinished parts, I want to say, or unfinished work to be done. And in this reality, it's our responsibility to identify all those parts of ourselves and put them back together, put ourselves back together, finish the work, finish the job. That only we can do this, and it's our responsibility to do this in order to realize our full potential. So I couldn't go past that definition. I just thought that was really interesting. So here's a great quote about the shadow. It's from the book Romancing the Shadow by Connie Zweig and Stephen Wolfe. Beneath the social mask we wear every day, we have a hidden shadow side, an impulsive, wounded, sad, or isolated part that we generally try to ignore. The shadow can be a source of emotional richness and vitality, and acknowledging it can be a pathway to healing and an authentic life. So I think this quote hits on an important point, that while it's hard to face our shadows, it is such a worthwhile pursuit, and it is something that sets us up for life. I think it's one of the spiritual challenges of life, is at some point to be brave enough to face your shadows, to confront those parts of yourself that you have preferred to keep hidden or have preferred to suppress instead of feeling. Carl Jung himself has stated that the shadow is 90% pure gold. So even though it can be terrifying to confront our fears, to embrace the things we hate about ourselves or reject about ourselves or are terrified of other people seeing, it's actually our shadow that holds our undiscovered gifts that we can uncover and allow to bloom by doing shadow work. So the benefits are really beautiful. And so that's an important thing to note here, because sometimes if we sort of research shadow work, there can be a lot of really negative words attached to the shadow, which I think creates more shame and fear around doing shadow work. Words like inner demons. I've even read that it's described as the evil twin, I don't think that's helpful at all, because those parts of us, no matter how difficult they are to face or show openly, they're still part of you, and you are a fragment of the divine. So they are not evil. In fact, meeting your shadow, accepting your shadow, forgiving your shadow, loving your shadow will provide you with a path back to oneness, to unifying yourself. One of the biggest benefits of doing shadow work, one of the most important reasons why we should do shadow work, is because if our default is to reject our shadow aspects, we run the risk of projecting. Projection refers to seeing things in others that are actually in ourselves that we don't want to see or we want to reject. And so in this sense, when we project in this way, what we're actually experiencing is people or situations in the world that are mirroring our shadows. And when we're stood in front of that mirror, we are confronted with what we see. So it's not actually those people that are triggering us, it's us triggering ourselves. They are just the vehicles for us looking in the mirror. A really easy example to cite here is, say, the keyboard warrior. And I think about how I used to behave on the internet a little while back. And I didn't think twice about telling someone what I thought of them. But really, when I think about what would compel me to comment on someone's post or a news story and project my superior opinion about something, it was coming from a triggered state that I wanted to be validated as right or smart or whatever it might be, funny even. And so social media is a really great example of that. If you catch yourself scrolling and you hit a post by someone who might be saying something that you disagree with or you think is stupid or even that makes you uncomfortable. So say someone who's really confident in their body and doesn't mind showing it off, and that automatically triggers a sense of, say, disgust or disapproval within you. That is a mirror. You are projecting your insecurities onto that person, and it has nothing to do with them. Their decision to perhaps post a photo of themselves in their bikini on their Instagram showing off their body, if that makes you feel judgmental, then there's a lot about you that you need to unpack, because it really shouldn't affect you at all. So it's when we start observing how we react to things, and especially we react to people and what other people do, there's a really big clue there around our projections. So think about the ways that you might be projecting your own shadow aspects, your own insecurities, your own judgments, your own frustrations, your own anger, your own guilt, your own victimization. How might you be projecting those feelings onto others? So that leads nicely into exploring some different shadow work techniques. This is not an exhaustive list. There are lots of different ways to work with your shadow. These are just some popular and quite common methods, and I've tried to cover a few different bases depending on the different ways we each feel comfortable in doing this kind of work. So some of us might feel more comfortable with creativity. Others might feel more comfortable with analysis, for instance. So I'm going to go through this list and share some practical tips on how you can work with your shadow. Okay, so I've touched on this earlier, but the first method is to observe and record your emotions and identify and analyze your triggers. So here's another quote from Jung. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. So that's in relation to that projection and those triggers. So what you can do is keep a log of your emotions, a daily log of how you feel. Doing this helps you explore your emotions, and you can also use journaling and specific journal prompts to explore your triggers and your reaction to triggers. So this is something that I've done myself, and it really helps to have a template that you can print out and keep next to you, say, that you can look at the end of the day, where you can log, you can record all the emotions you felt throughout the day. I've got a fantastic resource that I'm going to link in the show notes that makes that process really easy for you. And it really helps to identify patterns around the emotions you're feeling. Say if you have a pattern of experiencing outbursts of anger, or you seem to have a common progression of deepening depression or anxiety, heightened anxiety, you're able to start observing those patterns and start tracking, kind of reverse engineering them to get back to the source. And a way you can do that is to use journal prompts. So you keeping your emotions log and then also having a journaling practice to support that. So some really useful journal prompts here are, is there a recurring theme to your reactions? Do you have a tendency to get into arguments over the same topic? What pushes your buttons? What do you react to? So they're just some basic examples that gets you thinking about your reactions in more detail. And then it's time to analyze your responses. So your behavioral patterns here signal that you have a subconscious program running. So if you identify those patterns in your behavior, those behavioral responses driven by your emotions to getting triggered, then it helps to identify this subconscious programming. And once you've identified that, you can consciously create a new and improved program to help you deal with those triggers when they arrive in the future. Because it's really important to note the triggers don't go away. We just get better through this work at reacting to them. So there's also another way you can use journaling as a form of shadow work by keeping more of a shadow journal. So it's not so much a log and exploration. This is a bit more cathartic and I want to say creative. So if you experience dark emotions and you feel like you need a release from them and you enjoy writing, keeping a shadow journal can be really cathartic. It can really promote a sense of feeling your feelings, acknowledging them, accepting them, and then letting them flow through you, releasing them. So this is a way to really alchemize those emotions by allowing them to be realized and releasing them from deep within you to onto the page, through your hand, into the ink. I find that to be the act of writing a really powerful form of alchemy, actually. So using a shadow journal, you're aiming to write down the deep and the dark thoughts that feel trapped within you. So it does take some courage, and it takes some focus and also some vulnerability to allow those thoughts and feelings to flow out of you. But it's a really worthwhile practice, especially if you feel trapped by those negative feelings, that sometimes we don't know how to release them. And this is one way to do that, rather than acting out or lashing out or falling down in a pit of despair. We can process those emotions in a different way. And this can be as poetic as you wish, or as dark as you wish, or as direct as you wish. This can be lists, or this can be stories, whatever you feel you need to get out of you. You can also use art therapy as a form of shadow work. So in a way, this is similar to this shadow journal I just spoke of, but you're using visual art instead of writing in your journal. So if you're more of a visual person, this could be a really useful tool for you. You could be drawing, you could be painting, you could be using charcoal, you could be coloring in. You can even be scribbling. I find that to be really powerful because it's completely subconscious. Art holds so much subconscious symbolism. We don't even need to know what's coming out of us or what it means for it to be working. So it's as perhaps a more subconscious method of realization and release. And that could be really useful if you are dealing with quite deep, dark emotions, perhaps stemming from trauma, that the words are too confronting, that the art therapy might be a better place to start for you, because it's perhaps more symbolic than literal. And I just want to say on that as well, because I mentioned the word trauma, that if you have experienced a quite intense trauma, that you have to be careful. I need to be responsible in talking about this. You do need to be careful in engaging with the shadow work. You need to have a support system around you. You could be supported by professionals, or this could be support of family and friends. For those times when you do feel perhaps a bit confronted by what you're feeling out, I guess, because shadow work wants you to feel your feelings. Okay, the next one, inner dialogue. So inner dialogue describes the practice of literally conversing with yourself, your shadow in your mind. This is a really wonderful intuitive practice too, actually, because what you're doing is bringing together your conscious mind and your unconscious mind. And that is partly what we do when we're being intuitive. So firstly, you want to take a time out to just calm yourself, perhaps meditate for a little while. And you want to have a question prepared that you can ask your shadow self when you're in that calm state of receiving. So prepare that question before you go in, and then find that quiet, calm, comfortable place to get comfortable, meditate, and then ask your shadow that question. Talk to your shadow as if they're a person. Be open to what will come. Maybe it's nothing, but you've started that conversation. However, it could be that a word arrives, or a feeling is felt, or a vision appears that shows you a symbol or a scene from your childhood. It could be anything. So it's really important to have an open mind here and to not judge what comes through, just accept what comes through. Journaling the experience after you come out of that state is a really good practice, a supportive practice to help integrate what happens there as well. And so this can be an ongoing practice that you engage in every now and then, or it could be daily for a month. You might set yourself a goal in that way. And I definitely think that if you're practicing that regularly, you will see both your intuition develop, but also you'll be able to have a perhaps deeper conversation with the shadow as time goes on. You'll uncover deeper layers of realization and meaning. So the next technique is working with the shadow archetypes. Archetypes were really important to Jung. He describes archetypes as living psychic forces that demand to be taken seriously, and they have a strange way of making sure of their effect. I love working with archetypes. I work with them quite intensely and regularly in the tarot. But there's 12 specific archetypes that I believe Jung designed for the purpose of shadow work, because the archetypes each hold a higher aspect and a shadow aspect. Each have particular traits, both positive and negative. And basically what you do is use this list of archetypes to identify your own shadow aspects. So it could be that there's one particular archetype that sums you up completely, both positive and negative aspects, or it might be that you have a mix of shadow traits and positive traits for a few different archetypes. Using the shadow archetypes list is really useful if you're having trouble identifying your shadow aspects and you want to do shadow work, but there's nothing really obvious there for you to kick off with. It can also be a wonderful tool to use if you find examples really useful in your learning process. working with Jung's 12 archetypes is also really useful in helping you understand the contrasting accords of each archetype. So while in shadow work, we're focused on the shadow side of the archetype, you're also there looking at the contrasting higher aspects of the archetype. So by working with the strengths that come along with the particular archetypes and those positive aspects, it allows you to have goals that you can build upon. So if you hold the shadow aspect, then you also likely hold the reverse aspect, the positive aspect, the light aspect. This theory I work with a lot, actually. I mentioned tarot, similar to tarot with upright and also reversed appearance of cards. These light aspects of the archetypes might actually highlight aspects of yourself that you haven't realized you hold. That could be where the gold lies for you. And working on the shadow aspects might open you up to realizing those higher accords of the archetype you align with. And if you do read the tarot yourself, you can even use your cards to help you with this process, because there's a very strong alignment or correspondence between archetypes within the tarot and Jung's 12 archetypes. The next technique is mirror work. So mirror work is a really powerful method, but it's also really challenging, especially if you have issues around self-acceptance and loving your body and your appearance, because you're confronted with yourself, your appearance in the mirror. So in mirror work, you are facing yourself, you're looking yourself in the eyes, you're witnessing yourself as you are. Incredibly powerful. And it's very transformative if you can handle this practice. So the way you do it is you find a mirror and you stand in front of it and you place your hand on your heart. You gaze at yourself softly, gently. This is all about being gentle with yourself. You want to set a timer, because the whole goal of this process is to get beyond your comfort limits. So say aim for 5 minutes. You might find that really hard and you might only get to 3, but have a target and see how close you can get to it, and then push beyond a little bit longer until you reach your limit of what you can handle. While you're looking at yourself, you may notice thoughts and unexpected emotions bubble up to the surface. This is the process working. Just feel them, accept them, let them pass. You might also notice yourself wanting to look away, wanting to say negative things to yourself, wanting to judge yourself. Notice these and let those pass too. Try to intercept them with love. If that becomes too much, talk to yourself with love, with loving affirmation. Once you've reached your time limit, spend a little bit of extra time speaking those affirming statements to yourself. Look at yourself and speak to yourself. Whatever you feel you need to say to yourself in order to feel loved and nurtured and supported. So it's really trying to counter those emotions that you felt in that time when you were looking at yourself in the mirror. It could be that I love you, that's simple. It could be you are brave, you are strong. It could be I support you, I'm here for you. It could be I'm so proud of you, you're doing a great job. It could be you are so beautiful. So this process is all about noticing the feelings that arise inside of you when you're confronted with the act of looking at yourself, and especially in the eyes. They're a window to your own soul. It's also a really good opportunity to practice self-love and compassion and acceptance. So be aware of that that's one of the goals of this practice. So you want to repeat this process for a certain number of days. It could be that you set yourself a goal for a week or a fortnight or a month. I would say the longer the better, because the more frequently you can do this practice, the more confident you're going to become, the more acceptance you're going to generate for yourself, the more self-love you're going to cultivate. You can also keep a journal to track how you're reacting to seeing yourself. So again, it can be really difficult to be feeling those emotions during that practice. But if you sit down with your journal afterwards, it's a really good way to integrate those feelings and take reflections and then track how you evolve throughout the process. Evolve in your reaction to seeing yourself, and then also how you feel receiving your words to yourself. So I spoke earlier in the episode around the fact that so much of our shadow stems from our childhoods. So another really useful method is inner child work. So inner child work is a process of contacting and understanding and embracing and healing your inner child. And your inner child represents your first original self, your earliest self that entered into this world. And your inner child contains your capacity to experience all those beautiful, innocent feelings like wonder and joy and sensitivity and playfulness. All those things we used to feel before we got burdened with so much responsibility. So a way to do some inner child work is to write yourself a letter. Write a letter to address to your younger self, acknowledging the feelings that your younger self is feeling. So if you know what they are, if you know what your inner child wounds are, you can discuss those in this letter to yourself, your younger self, and acknowledge those feelings are valid, and then provide love and acceptance and nurture and support. Provide your younger self with what you were lacking at that time, what you needed to heal that wound that developed at that time. Another way to do this is to practice a form of mirror work that uses a photo of yourself as a child. So you can place that photo on the mirror, stick it to the mirror, and stare at the photo of yourself as a child. See what feelings arise in you. It might also be really difficult to look at yourself, your younger self, in the eyes, and it can be a really powerful practice. So you can do that work in the same way I described doing regular mirror work, with setting a time target, sitting in that place of probably discomfort as you observe them and witness the feelings that arise in you. Meet those feelings and thoughts with positive, supportive, loving, and nurturing affirmations. You can also be expressing that you're sorry. That can be a really healing thing to say to your inner child. You can thank yourself, your childhood self. You can forgive your childhood self. You can love your childhood self. And then don't forget to journal afterwards to integrate those feelings. So there are some common practices. There's so many more that we can do, and I'm sure we'll do further exploration into shadow work techniques in the future episodes. But I think it's important to say as well that it can take some preparation to get into your shadow work practice. So one of the most important ways to prepare is to set an intention of honesty with yourself and an intention to provide yourself with self-love and, very importantly, compassion throughout the process. Also, as I mentioned earlier, if you feel like this might be difficult to go through on your own, set yourself up with a support network, either loved ones and or professionals that can help you with this process. And I feel like it's also an important thing to balance out the shadow work, because it can, be difficult sitting in those lower vibrational emotional frequencies. So one way to balance that out is to also keep a gratitude journal. And this is a really simple process. It's really quick and easy to do. It's basically once a day or more if you wish, writing a list of the things that you're grateful for. And this can be 3 to 5 things that you are grateful for in that present moment. It's a nice challenge to make that list different every single day. When you do that, you'll find how much you're truly grateful for in your life. It's really powerful. So that can be a wonderful way to balance the more low vibe aspects of being in the depths of shadow work. And so what can you achieve when you do your shadow work? Well, you can gain a better understanding of yourself. You can transform destructive behaviors and destructive behavioral patterns you have, self-sabotaging behaviors especially. You actually gain an understanding of other people in your life as well, because you're able to recognize the shadows in others and also find some acceptance for other people's shadows and start to work on loving others in their wholeness as well. You gain a clearer perception of who you really are. It's about understanding yourself better, but it's also about the why and discovering all the layers of self. You get to work on your communication with others, so that's really important, being able to speak more honestly about your feelings, speak about your feelings with more confidence, speak about your boundaries, for instance, or your desires, which is all both important things. You can elevate your vibration and start to feel a bit happier in your life and start to realize those higher aspects, those contrasts to the shadows that you're exploring and working through. Your relationships improve because you have a better understanding of yourself. You're working on yourself. You're working hard to transform negative patterns that you have, and you have improved your communication. And again, it also allows you to see your, say, partner or your family's shadow aspects. And one really cool thing that comes out of this is you get to model what it is to work through your shadow. People do notice this. It rubs off on others. So it's a really positive influence you can have. And so I've experienced those benefits myself from that list of shadow work practices. In my own journey, I've adopted a frequent awareness practice, I want to say. I hold so much awareness in my day-to-day life. It's really powerful, and it really helps to transform my reactions to things that challenge me in my life. I have kept an emotions log, which was really useful in identifying my destructive patterns, I guess. I have done journaling as a form of integration and exploration. I have worked with the inner dialogue. I do that a lot in meditation and also through my channeling as well with my higher self. That's helped me a lot to come to realizations about my shadow aspects and providing help from my higher self, my inner wisdom to navigate a better way, basically. And I've also worked with tarot, having a daily tarot practice, working with the archetypes within the tarot to learn about myself. So in my journey, using those techniques, I was able to identify the feelings that I would feel when I'd get triggered. These feelings were anger and hurt and sadness, a lot of despair, a lot of suffering, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety and resentment. So not fun emotions to be feeling regularly. And so when I observed these emotions and I mapped them backwards, because I love to reverse engineer things, and I thought about what was triggering them, the behaviors I observed were that I would get very upset. There was a lot of crying and despair. I would lash out in anger, and this was usually caused by a deep felt and increasing frustration in not being heard. I would withdraw if things got too difficult for me rather than communicating what I needed. I would blame others for the experience I was having. And in doing that, I would be victimizing myself. I would also martyr myself, that like all I've done for you type of reaction. And so in observing all my behaviors in reacting to my triggers, I then went deeper and eventually I uncovered the root cause of these behaviors and these feelings. And it all tracks back to a wound that I was holding from the trauma from my childhood accident, which I've explored on a previous episode. If you want to hear about that, it is in the superstition and energetic protection episode. But basically, this wound was all about neglect. It was a neglect wound. And this was a very powerful discovery for me because it answered so many questions I had about why. Why was this happening to me? Why did I have to deal with this? Why wouldn't people just look after me the way I deserved? And so what did I do with this knowledge? So having this knowledge and working with this discovery, exploring this neglect wound, it led me to want to talk about what happened. So the first thing that I did that I needed to do, and this came up kind of by accident, but I'm really glad it happened, was having a really deep and open conversation with my parents about how I felt as a child. This was incredibly healing for me because I'd never spoken those words aloud to them. It allowed me to release some anger and judgment, and that was very powerful because I held a lot of judgment and I also had suppressed so much anger. And so to be able to actually speak about that honestly was really powerful. That discussion led me to gain a new acceptance for what has happened because I can't change what has happened, but I can change how I react to what happened. So that acceptance was very profound. This journey helped me to communicate my new understanding of myself with my partner in a much more healthy way. So I was able to communicate my understanding of the root cause of my reactions. I was able to better communicate my emotional needs and my intention to deal with triggers differently. So there was an openness about how I wanted to move forward from this discovery. I was able to open a line of communication about how we could help each other to do that. And I want to say this is obviously a work in progress because this doesn't get fixed immediately. And our romantic partnerships are always where the most projection happens. So it's important to note that it is a work in progress. Probably most importantly, this discovery allowed me to work on ways that I could feel more supported and care for myself. So obviously, this had a lot to do with my self-devotional practice, which I explored in depth last week on last week's episode. But it also included investing in myself to build my confidence and worthiness, I want to say, and connecting more with my family and my parents especially, which is a wonderful network of support for me. The benefits that I received in doing this shadow work and uncovering this root cause of my negative behavioral patterns, I was able to release some of the anger, hurt, and blame that I was subconsciously carrying in my life that was adding to my density. Obviously, I've improved my communication skills and have been able to identify my needs in a more defined way. I've been able to practice acceptance and forgiveness, acceptance of what happened and people's reaction to what happened, and also express forgiveness for the things that hurt me. And I've also been able to develop an awareness practice where I catch myself when I feel triggered, and I allow myself now to decide on how I want to proceed based on my feelings rather than just default to that knee-jerk reaction that stemmed from my subconscious hurt, basically. So I get to ask myself, I get to catch myself in the moment and ask myself, do I want to react in my old way or do I want to try something new that will serve me better? And I'm not going to lie, sometimes I still react in my old way, but there are times when I actually choose to stop and decide on another way that will serve me better, which is a huge improvement. So that's my journey through shadow work and my understanding of what shadow work is and how we can practice shadow work and the reasons why we should do that and the benefits that we realize in our lives when we face our shadows. Before I wrap up this episode, I just want to say that I am planning on a bit of a transition in my offerings. So I'm going to be taking a break from readings very soon. An extended break, I want to say, to work on some really exciting projects that I have in the pipeline for 2023. I'm really excited to be stepping into this new role of guide and teacher beyond just being the reader. So if you've been thinking about doing a soul reading, a soul transmission reading with me, which is a mixture of tarot, intuitive tarot, and Akashic Records channeling, then I encourage you to get in touch because I will be closing my books at the end of November. So there's not much time to book in. So if this is something you've been thinking about doing, check the links in the show notes to work with me one-on-one. Follow that link and you'll be sent to my booking page. If you've been thinking about it but not sure, send me a message. The easiest way to get in touch with me is on Instagram at The Initiates Podcast and have a chat, and I'll be very happy to discuss my offerings with you. So thanks again for joining me today. And until next week, I wish you peace, I wish you self-acceptance, and I wish you self-love.